Stop being nice right now. Yes, all that empathy, patience, and kindness you've been pouring into them, it's not helping. In fact, it's feeding their ego, reinforcing the very behavior you hate. Every apology you give, every compromise you make, it's fuel. And the more fuel you feed them, the bigger their control over you grows. You've been tricked into believing that niceness can change them, that patience or understanding or explaining yourself will somehow make them see you. Science tells a different story. Narcissists are neurologically wired to exploit kindness. They don't change, they adapt. And every time you try to win them over, they win too. If you're ready to reclaim your power, pause right now and think, what's one boundary I need to enforce today? One line I will no longer let them cross. Make it non-negotiable. The moment you do, the control they have over you begins to shrink. Stop explaining, stop justifying, stop pleasing, and start acting strategically. Let consequences, not kindness, dictate the interaction. Limit exposure. Protect your mental space. Let them feel scarcity. Let them adapt to a world where they no longer dominate your attention. When dealing with a narcissist, it's critical to understand that conventional social norms, kindness, empathy, patience, don't operate the same way as they do with most people. A narcissist's psychological makeup is wired for self-interest, entitlement, and manipulation. Kind gestures, instead of being reciprocated or appreciated, are often exploited. Every time you go out of your way to be accommodating, forgiving, or overly understanding, you're inadvertently reinforcing their belief that they can control or bend others to their will. What feels like generosity on your part is perceived as weakness by them. Research in personality psychology shows that narcissists are highly attuned to reward signals. When someone responds to their manipulative behavior with kindness, they learn that their actions produce favorable outcomes. A simple apology, compromise, or attempt to reason with them doesn't diminish their ego or make them introspective. It teaches them that pushing boundaries works. Over time, repeated nice responses can escalate their exploitative behaviors because the narcissist sees that there are no consequences for overstepping limits. Being nice also often involves emotional labor. Suppressing your own needs, glossing over hurtful behavior, or trying to maintain harmony at all costs. The narcissist doesn't share that emotional burden. Instead, they thrive on it. They receive validation, attention, and power while you pay the psychological cost. This creates a cycle where your good intentions are weaponized against your well-being. In essence, kindness toward a narcissist, while morally appealing, is ineffective in changing their behavior. Instead of empathy, what works is strategic assertiveness, setting clear boundaries, detaching emotionally, and allowing consequences to shape interactions. Understanding that niceness is often exploited is the first step toward reclaiming your autonomy and breaking the cycle of manipulation. Many people approach narcissists with the hope that patience, understanding, or empathy will lead to positive change. The instinct is natural. We believe that if we show someone care and tolerance, they might eventually see our perspective, feel guilt, or develop self-awareness. Unfortunately, research in personality psychology and clinical studies shows that this assumption often backfires with narcissistic individuals. Narcissists are not neurologically or psychologically predisposed toward genuine empathy. They are primarily self-focused and manipulative. Efforts to reason or patiently wait for them to grow are usually met not with reflection, but with further exploitation. When you exercise patience, the narcissist perceives it as tolerance for their behavior. When you show empathy, they see it as emotional fuel. They learn that even hurtful actions produce attention, validation, or accommodation. This reinforces their sense of entitlement and strengthens the very behaviors you hope to curb. Essentially, patience and empathy can unintentionally teach the narcissist that their actions have no negative consequences and that they can continue to manipulate and dominate interactions with impunity. Moreover, prolonged attempts to change a narcissist emotionally often drain the giver's mental and emotional resources. This creates a cycle where the empathetic person becomes increasingly frustrated and resentful, while the narcissist remains unaffected and empowered. It's a pattern of reinforcement. The more you hope for change, the more the narcissist thrives. The science is clear: emotional investment does not recalibrate narcissistic behavior. What works instead is strategic detachment, consistent boundaries, and consequence-based responses. These approaches limit the narcissist's influence, reduce opportunities for manipulation, and protect your mental health. Patience and empathy, while virtuous in general, are not tools for transforming narcissists. They are often the very levers that sustain their power. When dealing with a narcissist, kindness and accommodation are ineffective tools because they feed the narcissist's sense of entitlement. The more effective approach is clear, firm boundaries. Boundaries are not just rules, they are signals that communicate your limits, self-respect, and non-negotiable expectations. They tell the narcissist, your behavior has consequences, and you cannot exploit me without restraint. Setting boundaries begins with clarity. Identify exactly what behaviors are unacceptable and what your limits are in every interaction, whether it's disrespect, manipulation, or emotional exploitation. A narcissist thrives in ambiguity because unclear limits allow them to push, test, and escalate control. Explicit boundaries remove the guesswork, leaving little room for manipulation. For example, instead of silently tolerating insults, one might clearly state, "I will not engage in conversations where I am being demeaned." Next comes consistency. Boundaries only work when enforced reliably. If you occasionally allow violations or retract consequences, the narcissist learns that boundaries are flexible and can be tested. Consistent enforcement, such as walking away, ending a call, or refusing engagement, teaches them that their actions have direct repercussions. This removes the reward system they rely on and gradually diminishes their power. Psychological research supports this. People high in narcissism are sensitive to consequences, but largely impervious to appeals for empathy or understanding. They respond to structural limitations, not moral arguments. Boundaries are a protective shield. They maintain your emotional and mental integrity while reducing the narcissist's ability to manipulate. Ultimately, setting boundaries is not about punishment. It's about self-preservation and empowerment. It shifts the focus from trying to change the narcissist to controlling your own space, your energy, and your responses. Boundaries redefine the interaction dynamic. You no longer play into their game, and over time, the narcissist's influence weakens, while your control over your own life strengthens. One of the most powerful tools a narcissist has is your emotional reaction. They thrive on attention, validation, and control, and the more you react, whether with anger, guilt, sadness, or frustration, the more fuel you provide. Emotional responses are like high-octane energy for them. They magnify your involvement and reinforce their dominance. This is why detachment is not just a suggestion, it's a necessity when interacting with narcissistic individuals. Emotional detachment does not mean becoming cold or indifferent in life generally. It means maintaining calm neutrality in the presence of the narcissist, refusing to let their provocations hijack your mental or emotional state. When you respond strategically rather than emotionally, you remove the reward they seek. For example, if a narcissist attempts to provoke jealousy, guilt, or panic, a detached response communicates that their manipulations no longer have power over you. Over time, this weakens their ability to control interactions. Detachment also allows for clarity in decision-making. Emotional reactivity clouds judgment, causing you to make impulsive concessions, explanations, or apologies. A calm, neutral mindset helps you evaluate the situation rationally. Are they testing your boundaries? Are they manipulating you? Can this interaction be limited or removed entirely? By staying emotionally detached, you regain the mental space to implement boundaries and consequences effectively without being swayed by pressure or theatrics. Psychological research supports this approach. Narcissists are highly sensitive to cues of compliance and emotional engagement, but they respond poorly to controlled, unemotional interactions. Detachment reduces their ability to manipulate because it breaks the feedback loop they rely on. In essence, emotional detachment is not avoidance, it's empowerment. It preserves your mental health, prevents manipulation, and establishes a new dynamic in which the narcissist no longer holds the emotional cards. By remaining calm and strategic, you reclaim your power, forcing them to adapt or ultimately disengage because the old methods of control no longer work. One of the most subtle yet damaging habits when dealing with a narcissist is the compulsion to explain yourself. You may feel the need to justify decisions, clarify intentions, or defend your feelings, often in the hope of being understood or accepted. While this feels reasonable in most social contexts, with narcissists it becomes a tool they exploit. Every explanation you offer is like handing them ammunition, details of your thinking, values, and vulnerabilities that they can twist, manipulate, or weaponize. Narcissists are highly attuned to the emotional and cognitive patterns of others. When you explain yourself, they analyze the rationale, look for inconsistencies, and exploit them to assert control or provoke guilt. Even honest, well-intentioned clarifications can be reframed by the narcissist to create doubt, shame, or conflict. This dynamic feeds their sense of power and perpetuates a cycle where your efforts to be clear or fair actually strengthen their dominance. Psychological research on narcissistic behavior shows that they respond primarily to perceived power dynamics, not logical reasoning or empathy. They are less interested in understanding your perspective and more interested in using it to their advantage. Explanations signal openness to influence, which they exploit as leverage. By continually justifying yourself, you unintentionally validate their need for control. The solution is strategic silence and succinct communication. Establish boundaries without over-explaining. For instance, instead of justifying why you cannot accommodate a demand, simply state the boundary. That is not acceptable to me, and I will not engage further on this. No rationale is required, and no argument can be manufactured from neutrality. In short, stopping the habit of explaining yourself is a form of protective empowerment. It removes the raw material narcissists use for manipulation, conserves your emotional energy, and shifts the interaction from a battle of narratives to a dynamic where you control your space, your decisions, and your mental well-being. One of the most common traps when interacting with narcissists is the relentless focus on trying to fix them, please them, or accommodate their needs. Many people believe that if they just invest enough effort, patience, or understanding, the narcissist will eventually change. In reality, this approach is self-destructive. Narcissists are not wired to respond to your sacrifices with gratitude or introspection. Instead, your energy becomes a resource they exploit, while your own needs are neglected. Prioritizing yourself is about reclaiming your focus, energy, and autonomy. It means asking, what do I need to feel safe, respected, and emotionally healthy? It means understanding that your mental and emotional well-being is not secondary to someone else's entitlement. When you shift attention from fixing the narcissist to protecting yourself, you break the cycle of exploitation. You begin to act with intention rather than reaction, and your decisions are guided by your values, limits, and personal growth, not by their demands or manipulations. Psychological studies suggest that narcissists thrive in relationships where others consistently place the narcissist's needs above their own. By prioritizing yourself, you reduce their influence. You stop feeding their ego and stop providing the emotional leverage they depend on. Self-prioritization also creates clarity. You can set boundaries, enforce consequences, and detach emotionally without guilt, because your focus is not on changing them. It is on preserving yourself. Practical steps include scheduling your time around your priorities, enforcing limits on conversations or contact, and taking decisive action to protect your emotional health. Every decision should be evaluated for how it affects your well-being first, rather than how it might appease the narcissist. Ultimately, prioritizing yourself is not selfish. It's strategic. It signals that your life, emotions, and mental space are non-negotiable. This shift not only reduces the narcissist's control, but also restores your sense of empowerment, peace, and clarity. One of the most effective ways to neutralize a narcissist's power is through strategic distance. Narcissists thrive on constant access to attention, validation, and emotional reactions. The closer and more available you are, the more opportunities they have to manipulate, provoke, or exploit. By intentionally limiting your contact, you create scarcity, which weakens their control and forces them to operate under new constraints. Strategic distance doesn't necessarily mean complete avoidance, though in some cases it may. It begins with assessing the level of interaction that is safe and necessary. This might involve reducing phone calls, emails, or in-person meetings, and carefully curating when and how you engage. The goal is to preserve your energy and mental clarity, not to punish or provoke them. Each instance of selective engagement sends a clear signal. Your attention and presence are not automatic, and their access is no longer guaranteed. Psychological research on narcissism highlights that they rely on predictable responses to maintain control. When the feedback loop of availability, attention, and emotional reactivity is broken, their influence diminishes. They may attempt to test boundaries or escalate attempts to regain attention, but if you remain consistent in maintaining distance, the patterns of manipulation start to lose effectiveness. Strategic distance also reinforces other protective strategies, such as emotional detachment and prioritizing your needs. By creating physical or psychological space, you gain perspective, reduce reactivity, and strengthen your capacity to enforce boundaries. It's not avoidance out of fear, it's a tactical move to regain control over your life. Ultimately, using strategic distance transforms the dynamic from one of constant exploitation to one where you dictate the terms of engagement. Scarcity disrupts their sense of entitlement, limits limits their opportunities for manipulation and helps you reclaim emotional sovereignty. It is a core component of interacting with narcissists effectively, empowering you to protect yourself without falling into their traps. When interacting with a narcissist, it's crucial to understand that pleas, reasoning, or appeals to their conscience rarely work. Narcissists are primarily motivated by self-interest, entitlement, and a desire for control. They rarely respond to morality, empathy, or fairness. Instead, their behavior is shaped by reinforcement and consequences, the same principle that guides behavioral psychology. If there are no meaningful repercussions for manipulative, disrespectful, or abusive behavior, they have no incentive to change. Leveraging consequences means establishing clear, predictable, and enforceable outcomes for behavior you will not tolerate. For example, if a narcissist crosses a boundary by belittling, gaslighting, or manipulating, you immediately implement a consequence, ending the conversation, reducing contact, or refusing to engage. These actions are not punitive, they are strategic. They communicate that your boundaries are serious and that violation carries real, enforceable results. Over time, consistent consequences teach the narcissist that manipulation is no longer effective, while kindness or appeasement is unnecessary for maintaining influence. Research in personality psychology emphasizes that narcissists respond more to loss of control or privilege than to moral reasoning. In other words, the consequences you enforce are far more impactful than any attempts to appeal to their conscience. Kindness, patience, or negotiation may temporarily pacify them, but consequences alter their behavior by removing the rewards that sustain their manipulative cycles. Implementing consequence-based strategies also protects your emotional health. You are no longer reliant on hope, persuasion, or approval. Instead, you regain control over interactions and reduce the emotional toll of engagement. In essence, consequences are the language narcissists understand. By consistently applying them, you establish power, protection, and clarity in the relationship. This approach is far more effective than kindness or reasoning because it directly affects behavior, preserves your well-being, and diminishes the narcissist's ability to exploit your emotions. Dealing with a narcissist is never about being nice, patient, or endlessly accommodating. Kindness, empathy, and explanations, while noble in most relationships, are often exploited, feeding their sense of entitlement and reinforcing the cycle of manipulation. Science and psychology show that attempts to change or reason with a narcissist rarely work. They respond to control, boundaries, and consequences, not your moral appeals or emotional labor. The true path to reclaiming your power is rooted in strategic action. Set clear boundaries and enforce them consistently. Protect your emotional energy through detachment, refusing to react to provocations, and prioritizing your own well-being above their demands. Limit contact and create strategic distance. Scarcity reduces their ability to manipulate. And most importantly, rely on consequences rather than pleas, demonstrating that violations of your limits have real, enforceable results. This approach is not about punishment or cruelty, it's about self-preservation and clarity. You shift the focus from trying to fix someone who may never change to controlling your own life, choices, and emotional landscape. Over time, your calm, assertive, and consistent actions disrupt their patterns of manipulation, diminish their power, and restore your autonomy. Remember, being nice is not strength in these dynamics. Wisdom, boundaries, and self-respect are. By stopping the cycle of appeasement and embracing these strategies, you protect yourself, regain control, and reclaim the energy and peace that narcissists seek to drain. Your life is yours to live on your terms, and the first step is choosing strategy over kindness.